Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to draw a sunset in pastels. Now as you can see from a photo in the corner, this is featuring a beautiful silhouette of a horse as well, so this is also going to feature towards the end of this video. Now starting off with the sky, but the first process was to make sure that I had sealed off the area where the horse was. Now you can see I've got that dark outline around the horse, and that's because I have used Frisket, which is an adhesive film. It's low tack, but you can cut that to any shape you want, carefully stick it over where you want that area to be protected. And as you can see here, I'm going straight over with my soft pastel sticks. I can draw over the legs, the body of the horse, and not worry that that colourful pastel is going to go in areas where I'm going to eventually have the black for the silhouette. Now I don't use Frisket very often, but for this situation it works perfectly. And again, you can see there when I'm blending with my finger, I was able to go straight over the horse with no issues at all. Now something that I speak thoroughly about in the real-time tutorial, which is all linked in the description below, is how to maintain that colour saturation when we are starting to darken the layers of pastel. Now if the darker layers of pastel here were applied at the wrong time in that layering process, we're going to end up with a very muddy look to the colours underneath. This is of course something that would dramatically impact the effect that we're trying to create with a sunset or a sunrise. So as I'm continuing with this darker pastel pencil, I'm only putting it in areas where I know I need it to be darker. But I don't just use black. This is something that we want to be really focusing on, and the way that we are going to pick the pencils is going to help with how vibrant those colours are going to look when finished. Now this is one aspect that I do focus thoroughly, which pencils to select, what colours we should be using, and how we can maintain that colour saturation but still achieve the good contrast. This really was my priority from start to finish. Now with something like this, I would much rather darken it in stages and then add my highlights. If I need to then go back in and darken some areas again, I can do so. I would much rather do that than work with the dark to light layering process that we might typically use when drawing fur. Now as I'm coming in with my pastel pencils here, you can see that I'm being careful with where I'm adding my highlights. I don't want to be starting to add highlights in random places. This is really going to help build up that perspective that we're trying to create here. My main priority, along with the colour saturation and contrast, was to make sure that the sky that was nearer down towards the horizon looked like it was going further away. Now one thing that can affect that is if the clouds here were made to be more rounded, a little bit more fluffier looking, then that potentially might make those clouds look like they're coming towards the foreground, which obviously would then clash with the horizon. So this is something that I'm always looking to focus on, especially when working on seascapes, landscapes, anything like this. It really does help to create more of that three-dimensional look to the drawing. Now when working on this lower portion of the sky, I'm using the same combination of pencils, but despite that I've split this up into three main sections. This area that I'm working on the right, I was able to really experiment with the pencils and the way that I layered those pencils to get the colours that I wanted. This means then that I don't put that pressure on myself, that I'm trying to achieve this colour combination for the entire section of the sky. Now working on small individual areas like this is my personal preference. It's a way that I stop myself from feeling overwhelmed, especially when I'm working on something that is more complex. Now if you are an artist who likes to work in whole individual layers, then of course that's absolutely fine if that works for you. But if you do feel that you're looking at your reference photo, hesitating, not quite sure where you should be working next, then that is an indication that maybe that area you're trying to focus on is a bit too big. If you scale that down to a couple of inches, it's usually far easier to tackle. And this here is a prime example. I am literally just using all of the same techniques. The pencils aren't changing. But because I'm only focusing on one area at a time, I've got confidence with the pencils that I need to use and how to layer those pencils. It just makes the entire drawing process much more enjoyable. It really does help to simplify that process as well. Now a big tip when working on any areas that you want to have that impression that it's further away and less detail is to use the side of the pencils or a blunt pencil. So there are many times here where you can see that I'm holding it with my index finger sort of more lengthened down the pencil so that I can use the side of the lead. Here is a great example. But what this is enabling me to do is get the control with the pencil, but I'm not likely to then force in any areas with too harsher detailing, because of course we want this to look further away in the distance. If I had too many sharp lines and more detail here, that is going to pull this section of the sky much closer to the viewer. So now at this stage, this part of the sky was pretty much done. I was able to start then working on the rest of the sky. Now in a moment you're going to see a blue handled applicator. This is a round soft tool, and I used this here to begin putting in some pan pastels. Now I decided pretty much immediately here that I preferred the look of the soft pastel sticks. Now this did surprise me because I love my pan pastels. However, with the soft pastel sticks, I was able to create more of that vibrant colour saturation quicker. Now this can of course be done with the pan pastels, but I did feel like I was just going to have to add a couple more layers in order to get this same effect. And again there I tried to use my darker pan pastels over the top, and I just felt like it was creating a bit of that muddier look to the orange, and I really wanted to avoid that. So here I'm coming in with my soft pastel sticks directly to the paper and then blending that out with my round soft tool. Now there are going to be stages here where the colours looked a little bit muddy on the orange where it blended in with the purple, but I knew that I could fix that with the pastel pencils. And as you can see, that first layer with the soft pastel stick, it's not accurate, it's not where I want my finished drawing to be, but it does put in that initial bulk of the colour, which is just what I wanted for my base layer. Now when I began working with my pastel pencils over my soft pastel stick layer, I had to be really careful here that I was using the right colour. Now it's not that I was having to worry about using the exact colour, because as I've mentioned before, if I used a slightly different yellow or an orange, it won't make much of a difference as long as I made sure that the colour saturation was right. But I wanted to avoid any colours that could mix together with my base layer to create a completely different colour. Now an example of that would be if, let's say you had a blue base like I have at the top, and if I was to add lots of yellow there, if there was a yellow reflection in the sky higher up, I'd have to be very careful that those two colours don't mix together and create green. So this is something here where I was always just doing a little bit of trial and error, just practicing with a couple of different colour combinations to see what I liked for my background. And as you can see here, I'm also focusing on softening techniques. So using more of the side of the pencil and creating that impression of almost like rays of sunlight that were coming up through the backs of the clouds into the top section of the sky. So this is why I'm moving my pencils more left to right in order to create that effect. Now I didn't want to overblend completely because the very top section of the blue in the sky is at its softest. There is still a little bit here of that slight separation between the lights and the darks in the middle portion that I did want to create. Now once I'd changed a little bit more of that colour by using more of the purples and a couple of those subtle pinks, I can now come in with my yellows and lighter values to hint again at more of those rays of light. But I'm not jumping to my lightest pencils first. This is something that I always talk about when we're drawing realistic animals, fur, feathers, scales, whatever it may be. We always want to be working with the layering process being subtle and gradual so that we can increase that depth as much as we can. If we have a light or a dark base layer and then we just jump into a sharp difference in value, so if you've got a light base and you jump to a darker pencil without your midtones in between and the other way around, you're going to have more of that flatter look to the drawing because you don't have the softness that's achieved with the midtones before. Now this is also why I like to add the voiceovers to my real-time step-by-step tutorials whilst I'm drawing, because I'm able to then explain everything in the moment. Sometimes there might just be a slight shift in technique or why I'm doing something in a specific way that could potentially get forgotten about if I wasn't explaining it in the moment. I just think that this helps to make even the most complex subjects more easier to tackle. Now as I'm starting to work more towards the top of the sky, this is where I'm also now going to be making the pencil strokes a little bit longer. So I'm using a similar set of techniques with the side of the lead, but I'm now moving it in a bit more of a larger area from left to right. I'm also trying to capture a little bit more of a softer graduation between the blue and the purple pink colour in the middle. This is one of those areas where I don't want there to be a harsh start and stop point, because that's going to cause a real distraction and make it look like the sky is not seamlessly changing that colour, which again is going to impact the look of the sunset. Now, as I wanted to put in a little bit more of the blue here, I was again experimenting with the blues that I wanted to use. I didn't want something that was really dark because the top section of the sky was actually quite light in comparison. Although it does have some darker shades, there is also many of those lighter midtones as well. So I'm here experimenting, again, not jumping in with my darkest pencil first. I'm making sure to darken this in stages, just like I have done throughout this entire project so far. Now, as I'm adding my darker area and my subtle values, I'm always blending with my finger. Now, when I'm blending, I'm not just moving my hand in large circles because I'm going to end up over blending. Now, this is something that can happen very easily when working with pastels. Sometimes because the medium is so wonderfully easy to blend, we can then overdo that technique, which in some situations is what we want to do. But for something like this, I still wanted there to be some slight definition between the darker areas and these very subtle mid-tone blues as well. Now it's at this stage here, I'll just add a few more highlights, but I'm blending, I'm really happy with the effect, and it's all been made so much easier because I have had that frisket film in place first over the horse. It's really simplified this entire process. And in a moment now, I'm going to just really gently peel that frisket off, and you're going to see here it's just going to leave that beautifully clean section where I can now start working with the silhouette. Now onto the dark section, this is where I was being really careful. I want to be making sure here that I'm being as precise as I can on the edge. Because if I put any of this darker area of the black pastel onto the background, I'm going to really struggle to cover that up. So I'm always working with a fairly sharp point to my pencil when I'm working on the outer edges, just to make sure that I know exactly where that pencil is landing. I don't want to make any sections of the leg, for example, too wide, because I'm working with a blunt pencil, because that's going to be very difficult for me to fix with those colours. If I did accidentally go over a yellow part, let's say, and I wanted to put some of that yellow back over the black, it's going to end up creating a very muddy mess. So it's something that I'm being really, really careful of. Now, in any other situation, I would have broken this up into 2 stages. I would have drawn the horse first and then the foreground last. But for this, I knew that I didn't want to work over any areas that had black. So here I'm working on the section of the horse, and then straight after I work on the section of grass below it. This would just mean that I wouldn't have to then reposition my hand over any areas that had black that I could then potentially smudge into my background. Now for me, this was something that was really important because my priority from start to finish, which is why I used the frisket to seal off that paper, was to make sure that I always kept that good colour saturation. Now, one thing that I do mention in the real-time tutorial is one potential issue when using frisket is that you might accidentally cut out a little bit too much of a larger area. So an area that should have had a background part is actually been sealed off with the subject. Now that has happened a little bit here on the front of the chest. So all I'm doing is using a couple of the pencils that I had for the sky. I'm just gradually putting that in up to the horse so I can correct that, and then I can continue with the black. Now in this situation it was only about 2mm difference, but if I had have just kept on using the black there, in that one area of the chest I'm going to start to make it look a little bit wider. Now if I was to continue to do that, then I'm going to end up changing the proportions of the animal, which of course would then run into issues with it not resembling as much like that animal, and it can be potentially quite obvious that something's not quite right. So here in that situation, whenever I know that that's happened, I'll try my very best just to put in a bit of that background so that I've kept more towards that accurate proportion. Now when it came to working on the mane, this is where I did add a little bit more length and thickness to my pencil strokes so that I could make the mane look a little bit more similar to my own horses. And I also did the same with the legs, adding a little bit more feather, and it is something where we can just personalise that a little bit more to our own animals. So I really do hope that this video has been useful. If it was, I'd be very grateful if you could give it a like and a thumbs up because it makes a huge difference to my channel. I also upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. If you are interested in drawing along to this or any of my other real-time step-by-step lessons, then I'll link all of the information to that in the description below. If you do have any art-related questions, feel free to pop them in the comments because I'm more than happy to help if I can. and I'm going to be uploading another video at the end of the week. But as always, thank you so much for watching.